secrets,
Well,
and so forth. Yeah. So
the
I'm a tax person.
yeah, I mean, it is daunting to try and evaluate intellectual property because things change so fast. But also, this what we're dealing with in today's world is the subject of toxic assets. Uh, the how do you attempt to place a value on a series of securities that have been sold and partitioned or segregated into 3 or 4 different pieces so that you don't have the whole security to examine when you're trying to put a value on it. Those are federal government problems. I'm glad I don't deal with them. But in fact, there's a lot of subjectivity going on that is contrary to what has been, as you say, historical evaluation of what can something be sold for, or what did you pay for it.
And what it also means, unfortunately, is that two companies could have very similar circumstances and their financial reports could be quite different because the judgment of the CPA firm that they're dealing with is different.
Yes, and that's right. So if you're looking at a financial statement, which is not necessarily what a business valuation involves per se, but if you're looking at a financial statement, you have to go behind it and find out what elements have been taken into consideration, and then you need to think about what's the appropriate method to value this business based on what you find out about it. See, there's an investigation involved.
Okay. So the next question is, why would someone need a business valuation specialist who may not even actually have a business?
Well, the quality of the individual who does the valuation report establishes some level of credibility. So there are many people out there, and I think we'll talk about it later, business brokers who put a value on a business, and they use a different method, and it's more subjective. But the valuation report has to be able to stand either in court or examination by another competent professional, and consequently, you would hope that the professional is providing an answer closer to the reality than a so-called rule of thumb.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The other thing, though, related to this, and maybe what I was alluding to, is in the estate planning area, and talking about business valuation adjustments, or maybe we should say just valuation adjustments related to properties, things like tenancy in common. Okay, so it's just a common way of owning property together in undivided interest. So I own 50% and you own 50%. Well, because I own 50%, there should be, I'm entitled to some adjustments because that interest isn't as saleable as if I own the whole thing. Isn't that right?
You absolutely, and you've hit on probably the most difficult of all the analyses, is how do you establish if there's 3 owners,
yes,
as opposed to 2, just to make your example more complex. Nobody has the ability to sell, nobody has the ability to loan without the approval of the others, because if they do, you run into a problem of is each share worth a third, or is it worth less than a third because of the potential of litigation to solve the problem of how to sell the property? Very difficult issue.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm getting at here, and I want our audience to know, is this is a huge area that we are just touching on right now. And the whole area of valuation is a huge area anyway. But in the estate planning area, it's in the forefront of what we are talking about, particularly for very wealthy families. And what it comes down to is that lifetime giving of fractional interests presents an opportunity for making transfers at dramatically reduced values than if you had retained these items in your estate.
Okay, what we're talking about is the discount for lack of control, or the discount for lack of liquidity or marketability.
Yes.
And those can have as you say, a dramatic effect on value. If you have 2 or 3 children, each one getting less than a controlling interest, their share has been, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't represent that this is a legal opinion, but as we read cases that come from the courts, we see that the courts accept the fact that a partial interest has less value than if it was just pro rata, a third. It could be worth less than a third because of the lack of control. And then the other issue is the property or the asset saleable? Because if it's not liquid, not saleable except at a certain price, then you have another discount to take into consideration, is how much would you have to offer this piece of asset at in order to get somebody to buy it.
That's right.
So what Michael says is extremely important for people who are in the position of succession planning, estate and gift work. They should always consult with somebody who's qualified to give them an opinion, as opposed to just somebody who seems to understand accounting per se.
Right. And so where we are is that and again, want to highlight to our audience, is this is a team effort.
Oh,
okay.
Yes.
And so a valuation specialist like Steve is a vital part of that team, because they're the ones that provide the report that we rely upon. And again, we're preparing for litigation, if you will, and we need the good person to be there, to be on our team for when the IRS has their person on their team. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. And you alluded to it a little bit before. To distinguish the valuation approach used by a business broker compared to the report issued by a business valuation specialist. And you may not even get a report from a business broker. But
well, interestingly enough, I gave a talk to a local group, and I was very pleasantly surprised to find out that some of them did issue reports.
Okay.
They didn't meet the AICPA standards or IRS standards, but they were comprehensive and useful. The thing about a business broker is that they generally use a rule of thumb. If they're experienced, they know that there's a different pricing structure to buy or sell a pizza restaurant than there is to a roofing company. Mm-hmm. And they also know the locale, because they're local for the company that they're working with. And so they have an idea of the competition, they have an idea of the risk, and they don't use the same terms as we do, but they generally, the rule of thumb for a business broker is, if something is really valuable, it might sell for 4.5 or 5 times the seller's disposable income, where if it's chancy, risky, it might sell for 1 or less than 1 time income. Whereas we have to, as appraisers, business appraisers, we develop a risk rate based on certain methods. And the answers may be the same, but we have an opportunity to justify our position, as opposed to saying, I think it's worth 2 times net. Mm. And that it leaves you wide open for criticism later on.
I think there's another thing that maybe we should mention a little bit, and that is, and I've told you that I've actually interviewed a broker here on the show before, but what it comes down to is, what your study develops is an estimate of the fair market value for the marketplace. But this buyer may be willing to pay a totally different price, maybe significantly more,
yes,
than the value that you develop, because of the fit with their business, because of a technology, because it's a competitor that they want to take out,
yep,
or whatever.
It's called